Good morning. Thank you, Juan. So the rest of the agenda for today is very much focused on the European Union. So before we go focusing on the EU, I want to take you around the globe as we all think about summer holidays and travel. But I'm going to take you on a slightly different journey around the world. And that journey is about how the voice and the scientific expertise within the European Union is being used and leveraged around the world to support equity and access to COVID vaccines and therapeutics. And the way we've done through this is through the open pilot. And I'd just like to acknowledge Victoria Palmi, who's not here with us, and Beatrice Durve, who are part of my team, for preparing this slide deck for me. So the context of the COVID-19 and the regulatory challenges from an international perspective is the need to have a very rapid and swift response, an agile and flexible response to the COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. And we were, at an international level, regulators were really struggling to see how we could work together to face the same challenge. We were all facing the same challenges at the same time. And we knew that there were relatively few vaccines or therapeutics available. And so we would be assessing the same medicines, and the same medicines would need to be made available and launched throughout the whole world, not just within the European Union. Limited expertise were available, and how can we leverage those expertise? And that's very much part of what we're trying to do in the International Affairs team, which is all about reliance and leveraging. And we knew also there were going to be high workload. We needed to work at pace and to rapidly come up with solutions and answers and scientific decisions, not only in terms of the authorization, but to support companies in the development of products. So these were, I'm not going through all of this, but the answer we came up with was something called open, and it's opening procedures to non-European regulators. And there was a rather tortuous phraseology in order to get the wonderful acronym of open, which I think is really summarizes what the EMA is all about. So opening our procedures at EMA to non-EU authorities, the open. So what it was all about was how do we share the scientific expertise, the limited expertise at the time, to tackle the common challenges in COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. So we had, and we have already at the EMA, a number of confidentiality arrangements with international regulators. And we asked them whether they would be interested in participating in open. And we had positive responses from the regulators you see on the left-hand side: Australia, Canada, Japan, Switzerland, and the World Health Organization. I'll come back about the WHO specifically in a little moment. And what we asked them to do was to participate not just as observers, which is what they were doing anyway. We asked them to participate as experts in the CHMP and EMA task force discussions and evaluations. That meant that they could sit around the table, or the virtual table through video conferencing, and participate and contribute to the discussions. We were able to bring in the expertise from Japan, from Australia, Switzerland, Canada, and the WHO. The only part they didn't participate in was the final risk-benefit assessment and the decision-making on that. But other than that, they were able to contribute, they were able to listen, participate fully as experts, and they were not bound by the outcome of the CHMP. They were able to take their own decisions at the end of it. What is interesting, though, is that ultimately there was an extremely high concordance rate. And so while they kept their independence, the open procedure meant that we had a high level of concordance between all participating regulators. Next slide. I do not expect you to read this. What we just wanted to show here is to say that the open procedure, when it was first launched, came at a time when the CHMP was quite busy. But you can see as we switch over from 2020 into 2021, the rate at which the ETF and the CHMP were considering applications really picked up. This meant a huge workload here within the EMA for the task force, but also for the participating regulators. And it just shows the importance of working together, because we were all dealing with multiple applications in parallel. And so by leveraging and working together, we were able to accelerate the assessments and the approvals of the vaccines and therapeutics. Just to say this, the open pilot, every single vaccine and every single therapeutic was included in the pilot. So there was no opt-out from industry. Even though some of them were slightly uncomfortable with this, there was no opt-out offered to industry. Next slide. So the successes. We have just done a one-year assessment of the pilot. And so what did we come up with? These are some of the 5 headlines. First of all is the communications. So it meant that already at the level of the international affairs team, we deal with something like 1,800 transactions or questions with international partners. A single transaction could be 1 email, or it could be 20 emails. But what it did through the open the discussions, we were able to have a really, really enhanced communication with the international partners on the COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics, pre-approval and post-approval. It's very important, because there was a lot of focus on the post-approval safety and efficacy. We were looking at similar data for similar products. I mentioned before about the independence of decision making. The fact that we were able to review and have the same questions that were made to industry from the CHMP that were then shared with the other regulators, it meant there were fewer repeat questions and there were fewer labeling differences across the participants. We believe that it did, and the feedback we had from international regulators is it did accelerate assessment and access outside of the EU. I'll come back in a little bit just to talk specifically about WHO and why we think that was important, because we do believe that there was a significant global public health impact through the use of this reliance. And then what was very important for many of the participants was the independence. None of the participants were bound by the outcome of the CHMP. They were perfectly free to contribute and to take from the CHMP decision and opinion what they wanted to, and then use that to inform their own national decision making. Next slide. So the impact. The feedback was it did accelerate approval. But importantly, I want to draw the information about points of WHO participation. While the Canadians could only approve for Canada, the Australians for Australia, Japanese in Japan, and the Swiss in Switzerland, the CHMP assessments and opinions for the 5 vaccines formed the basis of the emergency use listing at the WHO. And the WHO was able to do this extremely quickly because they were participating in process for the CHMP opinions of the vaccines. And we were able to, and on the basis of these 5 CHMP opinions for the vaccines, we have registrations of the vaccines in over 160 low and middle income countries. That means that as soon as the WHO added the vaccine to the emergency use listing, there was a letter sent to UNICEF, to Gavi, to COVAX, saying you may now begin to procure and deploy the vaccines. Now, I'm copied on every one of these letters, and I can say that when I share them with the colleagues here at the EMA, the product teams, and just show them the global health impact, it's not just about deployment of the vaccine within the 30 EA EFTA countries, but when they can see the letter goes to UNICEF saying you can now procure, you can now deploy, you go to Gavi, you can now procure and deploy globally. This is incredibly powerful, and it's a good message here within the House. The colleagues that our work isn't just focused in the EU. Next slide. We're having some technical problems about this. So what happens? Now that the work on reliance for COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics is slowing down a little, but we continue to work on this, we want to see how can we move the pilot forward? How can we continue this success we have of collaboration with international regulators? there are some things we need to do first. So the way the pilot was put together, but there are some things that need to be improved. The terms of reference, how it works. There are some things, just the mechanics of it, and we need to learn how to make it work better. The visibility. I'm ashamed that I have not given enough attention to the public communication of the open pilot. And so one of the things we will need to do, and working with the communications colleagues here and with our partners, is to raise the visibility. And it has been enormously successful. And I think so there needs to be some visibility to what we are doing at the level of the European Union to promote regulatory concordance and the approval. I just want to say here that in a meeting at the end in December with the WHO, it was very powerful that Mariangela Simaus, who's the Deputy Director General, sorry, the Assistant Director General for Medicines and Access, she did say that through the work we have been contributing to, that the regulatory issues were not the barrier to equity and access to vaccines. And so I think it's very important that we have played a role in that, in making sure that the regulatory issues are not the barrier. The pilot has also helped to reduce the submission gap. We have seen that regulators who weren't getting the approvals of the vaccines at the same time as EMA during the 1.5 to 2 years of the pilot, we have seen that the submission gaps have closed, particularly as for the approvals and then the variations. So where do we go from here? We have 4 buckets. So the 4 buckets where we're going to move forward to are: 1, recognizing the scourge of antimicrobial resistance. We will be moving forward on this open collaboration for antibiotics and antimicrobial resistance for both human and veterinary products. We will be looking to see how we can work with other regulators on collaborative assessment of post-approval CMC aspects. So that's the manufacturing aspects of products. The next 2 areas I think are particularly important. One is products that are designated as under the PRIME scheme. So these are products that we think have particularly high public health impact. And so if they have high public health impact within the European Union, they are likely to have a public health impact outside of the European Union, particularly in the context of our work with WHO. But the last bucket here is about public health emergencies rather than animal infestation emergencies. So that's how we're going to work forward with the pilot. And that will begin to roll out in the next coming years. Next slide. I think it's the last one. So take-home messages. We believe the open and the work that the EMA has been doing with our international collaborators has facilitated the assessment of the COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics, and we have really made a contribution. The regulators involved, they have told us that it has accelerated their assessments and helped align on decisions. That obviously that means that for patients and healthcare professionals, we have the same information, the same products approved. For industry, it also means that they have been able to do one single development program and not multiple development programs for different regions around the world. And we think it is very important as part of the work we're trying to do in the international world in terms of avoiding duplication of efforts and increased reliance. So next slide, I think, is the last one. Can I ask you just to skip one to the next one? Because I just want to finish this. I'm going to take Juan's patience. I'm going to stretch his patience. Because I also want us to skip away from COVID-19 and talk about some other good things that are going on internationally. And we can come back to this at another meeting if there's interest. One is the EU Medicines for All initiative. This is formerly known Article 58. Just want to highlight that we have a number of products going through the procedure at the moment, and we expect to have at least one other decision before the end of this year, in the next couple of months. But there are currently 5 medicines that hold a scientific opinion. Just on these 5 medicines, and there's a parallel to the 5 vaccines, we have approvals, 127 marketing authorizations in 79 countries worldwide for these 5 medicines. And these approvals are primarily focused in the continent of Africa and Southeast Asia. with some in Latin and South America. So again, this is about how do we leverage the European expertise, the European scientific outputs in terms of supporting access to medicines by patients in low and middle income countries. The next slide. Because it's not the only pathway. We also work with WHO on something called the collaborative registration. And if we go to the next slide, Xenia, that'd be great. The title is horrendous, and I'm really sorry about that. It's not mine. Collaborative registration procedure using stringent regulatory authorities. But if you just click one more, we are currently through this. Again, this is WHO pilot, and so there are currently 9 medicines that have gone through the pilot, but these have resulted in 57 authorizations in 23 countries. Again, primarily focused on the continent of Africa. And so I just wanted to give these as examples that we have multiple pathways we are using to leverage the output of the CHMP to contribute to public health and global health. And there are various other things we're doing, and I won't take your time now. But I just wanted to say that this is also part of, we're not just looking at patients, consumers within the European Union, but also looking to see how we can contribute to the work that's ongoing in terms of the global public health. So with that, Juan, I hand back to you, and thank you very much for your patience.